An elderly black woman arrives at the hospital seeking help, only to be greeted with coldness and hostility from a nurse. The scene quickly turns tense as the nurse's prejudice shows in her words. The old woman responds with dignity, and a symbolic act leaves everyone watching in stunned silence. The chapter ends on a cliffhanger as the situation escalates. "We don't treat people like you here. Go sit somewhere else." The words cut through the sterile air of the hospital waiting room like a knife. Patients glanced up from their magazines, phones, and whispered conversations, their eyes flicking toward the nurse who had just spoken. Her crisp white uniform and neatly pinned hair screamed authority, but her tone dripped with contempt. The fluorescent lights above hummed faintly. A monitor beeped in the distance. Yet, for a moment, the whole room felt silent, suffocated by the weight of her words. The woman she had spoken to stood quietly by the reception desk, an old, black woman with skin weathered by years of labor and wisdom. She clutched a worn leather handbag against her chest, her fingers trembling slightly, though her eyes were steady. I only need to see a doctor," the old woman said softly. Her voice, though weak, carried dignity. The nurse leaned across the counter, lips curled in a mocking smile. "Maybe where you're from, but not here. This hospital is for paying patients. Real patients, not charity cases." She spat out the last two words, loud enough for everyone to hear. A mother sitting nearby shifted uncomfortably, pulling her child closer. An older man shook his head but said nothing. Silence, as always, became the accomplice of cruelty. The old woman did not flinch. Slowly, she opened her handbag, pulled out a folded medical card, and slid it across the desk. The plastic ID caught the light as it landed, its edges cracked but official enough that the nurse didn't even look at it. With a flick of her manicured nails, she pushed it back toward the woman as if it were contaminated. "This doesn't mean anything here. Maybe you should try the free clinic down the street. This is a respectable hospital." The old woman bent down, picked up the card with deliberate care, and tucked it back into her bag. Her silence was not weakness. It was patience. Then, with a trembling but steady hand, she set her cane firmly on the tile floor, the sound echoing sharply through the waiting room. Tap. The small, symbolic action rang louder than words, as if to say, "I will not be dismissed." Finally, she raised her eyes and spoke in a voice that carried across the room. "You don't know who you're turning away, but you will." The nurse stiffened, her arrogant smile faltering for just a second. A ripple of unease passed through the waiting room from behind the glass doors. The faint sound of hurried footsteps approached, heavy, authoritative, and growing louder. The old woman didn't look back. She simply stood there, calm as a storm cloud waiting to break. The nurse glanced toward the doors, her smirk faltering into uncertainty. And then the waiting room doors swung open. "Why are you still standing there?" The nurse snapped, her voice sharper now, trying to mask the unease creeping into her tone. "Didn't you hear me? I said leave." The old black woman did not move. Her cane stood like a pillar beside her, grounding her in place. Around the waiting room, whispers began to stir. A teenage boy leaned over to his mother, whispering something that made her shush him quickly. An elderly man shook his head again, muttering under his breath. Though still too afraid to intervene, the nurse adjusted her badge, flashing it as if it were a weapon. "I am in charge here. You don't get to argue. You don't belong here." Her words hung in the air, bitter and sharp. The old woman's eyes softened, not with fear, but with pity. She pressed her hands against her bag, as though holding on to something heavier than just belongings, perhaps memories, dignity, or even truths unspoken. Her silence made the nurse uneasy. Silence can be louder than anger. "Do you know how many people are waiting for real emergencies?" The nurse pressed on, her voice louder now as she turned to the watching crowd. "People who actually need care. And here we are, wasting time on someone who should know her place. Gasps rippled through the room. A father in a business suit, holding his daughter's hand, spoke up timidly. Maybe you should let her see the doctor. She looks like she needs it. The nurse spun toward him, her eyes narrowing. Do you work here? No? Then keep your opinions to yourself. The man sat back ashamed. His daughter, however, stared at the old woman with wide eyes, a silent kind of respect shining in them. Meanwhile, the old woman slowly lowered herself into a chair, her cane balanced across her knees. She did not beg, did not protest. She simply sat, as though waiting not for permission, but for justice. The nurse scoffed, pulling out a clipboard and pretending to write something. But her hand trembled slightly. Something about this woman's presence unsettled her. This wasn't the usual compliance she expected. Tap, tap. The old woman gently drummed her fingers against her cane. The sound was subtle, rhythmic, yet heavy with meaning. Each tap was a quiet refusal to be erased. Then she spoke, her voice clear but soft. You are loud, child. But loudness does not make you right. The nurse froze, stung by the words. For a moment, her mask of superiority slipped, revealing insecurity underneath. But she quickly straightened, raising her voice again. You don't scare me. You're just another case I can turn away. People like you always think you're owed something. The old woman's lips curved into the faintest smile, not of amusement, but of knowledge. One day, she murmured, you'll learn who truly gives, and who truly takes. Her words unsettled the room, and then the sound of the heavy footsteps grew louder. The glass doors rattled slightly as someone powerful approached. Shadows flickered against the frosted panels. The nurse glanced nervously at the doors, her confidence slipping. She shuffled the papers in her hands as if trying to appear busy, but her fingers twitched. The old woman didn't look at her. She simply stared forward, patient, as though she already knew who was coming. The doors began to push open. Light from the hallway spilled into the waiting room, stretching long across the tiles. Conversations hushed. Breaths caught. The moment of reckoning was about to begin. The glass doors swung wide with a sharp whoosh, and silence swept over the waiting room. A tall man in a dark suit stepped inside, his polished shoes striking the tile with authority. His presence alone shifted the air. Conversations died instantly, heads turned, and even the restless children grew still. The golden badge clipped neatly to his coat pocket caught the fluorescent light hospital director. Nurse straightened so quickly her chair screeched against the floor. Her face transformed in an instant, from contempt to counterfeit politeness. Oh, Director Harris, she said, her voice sugary sweet. A rehearsed smile plastered across her lips, but her hands betrayed her, trembling, slightly as she smoothed her skirt. Director Harris surveyed the room with calm, steady eyes. His gaze lingered on the old black woman sitting firmly in her chair, cane across her knees, her dignity unshaken. He noticed how the room's tension seemed to orbit around her, like a storm with its eye at the center. What is going on here? His voice was deep, controlled, not angry, but expectant. The kind of tone that demanded truth, not excuses. The nurse rushed forward, waving her clipboard like a shield. Oh, it's nothing, sir. Just a routine matter. This patient doesn't have the proper registration. I was simply redirecting her to the right facility. Her words tumbled too quickly. They hung in the air like fragile glass, threatening to shatter. The old woman did not move. She simply lifted her chin slightly, eyes calm, as if she had been waiting for this exact moment. Director Harris tilted his head, studying the nurse carefully. Redirecting? He repeated, the single word slicing through her excuse. In front of an entire waiting room? The nurse's smile twitched. She stammered, Well, I was only trying to maintain order. You know how it is, sir. We can't have Can't have what? His voice was still calm, but sharper now. The waiting room felt smaller, the walls inching closer. Patients held their breath. Some leaned forward in their chairs, hungry for justice they had been too afraid to demand out. The nurse faltered, her words dying on her tongue. At that moment, the old woman placed her hand firmly on her cane, the sound of wood against tile echoing again. Tap. That single sound drew the director's gaze to her. She met his eyes, steady and unbroken. "I came here for help," she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of every patient who had ever been silenced. "But instead, I was told I do not belong." The words pierced deeper than shouting ever could. Gasps fluttered across the room. The teenage boy whispered, "She said it." His mother pulled him close but didn't scold him this time. Even the businessman from earlier looked relieved that the truth had finally been spoken aloud. Director Harris's jaw tightened, but his composure never cracked. He turned slowly to the nurse. "Is this true?" The nurse's face burned red. She sputtered, "No, sir, that's not. She's twisting my words." She misunderstood, but her voice trembled, her eyes darting from the old woman to the watching crowd. The witnesses' faces told another story. Every pair of eyes condemned her silence more than words could. The old woman, still seated, said nothing more. She didn't need to. Her presence alone filled the room with a quiet power that made the nurse's lies crumble. Director Harris stepped closer to the nurse, lowering his voice so only she and those nearest could hear. But the sharpness of his tone carried to everyone. "Do you know what happens when you deny someone care on this ground?" The nurse swallowed hard. Her clipboard slipped from her hands and clattered to the floor. Papers scattered across the tiles like guilty secrets. The director didn't bend to help her pick them up. Instead, he looked once more at the old woman and said, with a calm finality, "You will be seen." The room exhaled as though it had been holding its breath for hours. Relief washed through the air, but the storm was only beginning. The nurse froze, pale now, as she realized her authority had been stripped away in a single sentence. And behind the old woman's calm eyes, a deeper truth was waiting to emerge, a truth that would unravel everything the nurse thought she knew. "Take a seat," Director Harris instructed firmly. Though his voice carried respect rather than command, the old woman did not argue. She simply inclined her head slightly, the gesture as graceful as a queen acknowledging her court, and settled deeper into the chair she had already claimed. Her cane rested across her lap like a scepter, silent but powerful. The nurse bent quickly to scoop her scattered papers off the floor. Her cheeks flamed red, and sweat glistened at her temples despite the cool hospital air. Every time she glanced up, she felt dozens of eyes stabbing her with judgment. She muttered under her breath, "This is being blown out of proportion. It's not what it looks like." But whispers spread anyway. She told her to leave. I heard her say she didn't belong. Shameful. In a hospital of all places. The nurse's throat tightened. She had spent years perfecting her authority, her ability to silence complaints with a glance. But today the silence worked against her. Meanwhile, the old woman sat with stillness so profound it unsettled even the walls. Her calm was not surrender. It was defiance clothed in dignity. Director Harris turned back to the nurse. "Your name?" She blinked rapidly. "Susan." "Nurse Susan, sir." His eyes narrowed, though his voice remained calm. "Susan, do you know the code of this hospital?" "Of course," she said quickly, her voice high-pitched. "We treat patients with fairness, equality, respect." "Respect?" He cut in. The single word cracked through the air like thunder. Her mouth snapped shut. The director didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Authority wasn't about volume, it was about truth. He turned to the old woman. "Ma'am, did she refuse you?" The old woman finally spoke, her voice carrying clear across the room. "She told me I was not worthy of this hospital." that my place was somewhere else. The collective murmur swelled again, stronger this time. Someone whispered, "Unbelievable." Another added, "My mother comes here." What if she had been treated like that? Nurse Susan wrung her hands, her confidence collapsing. "Sir, please, it's a misunderstanding." She's twisting it. But even as she spoke, the truth was written across every face in the waiting room. They had heard enough. Director Harris did not reply immediately. Instead, he studied the old woman's face carefully. There was something familiar in her eyes, a quiet strength he had seen before, though where, he could not yet place. He addressed her directly. "May I ask your name?" The old woman's lips curved into a faint smile, but she did not answer right away. Instead, she reached into her worn leather handbag once more. The room grew still. Everyone leaned forward slightly, expecting a piece of paper, an ID. Some proved to silence the nurse's cruelty, but what she pulled out was not a medical card dotted. Was a small photograph, faded at the edges, the colors worn but still clear enough to recognize. She placed it on her lap gently, her fingers brushing the image as if it were sacred. Director Harris's eyes flickered down at the photo, then back up at her face. Something shifted in his expression, a spark of recognition, of respect. Nurse Susan, craning her neck, tried to peek at the photograph but couldn't see it clearly. Her curiosity battled with her fear. The old woman looked at the director, her voice calm but layered with meaning. "My name is not important. What matters is how you treat the people who walk through these doors." Her words rang through the waiting room like a bell. Director Harris gave a single nod, as though confirming something only he understood. "You're right," he said softly. Then louder, "This patient will be seen immediately, and she will be given every courtesy due to her." Nurse opened her mouth to protest but stopped when she saw the steel in his eyes. The waiting room buzzed with approval. Some smiled faintly. Others nodded. A wave of unspoken justice filled the air, but beneath that justice was an undercurrent of mystery. Because the way Director Harris looked at the woman, with recognition and respect, suggested that she was not just another patient. She was someone far greater. And the truth of who she was would shake this hospital to its core. Old woman sat silently, her cane balanced across her lap, her photograph resting beside it like a sacred relic. Every patient's eyes seemed to orbit her, drawn not by her frailty but by the strange gravity of her presence. Nurse Susan fidgeted with her papers, her forced composure slipping. Her voice trembled as she muttered, "She's just trying to cause a scene. People like her, they always exaggerate." But no one was convinced anymore. Director Harris folded his arms, his gaze fixed on Susan like a hawk observing prey. "Enough," he said quietly, but the weight of the words silenced her more effectively than any shout. The nurse swallowed hard, her throat dry. Turning to the old woman, Director Harris asked, "Do you have family, ma'am? Someone we can call to support you?" For a moment, her expression softened, as though touched by the question. She placed her weathered hand gently on the photograph, stroking its edge. "My family has always walked with me," she said softly. Even when unseen, her words hung in the air, cryptic yet powerful. The nurse scoffed nervously. "Oh, come on. Don't turn this into poetry. She's nobody. Just an old woman with a story to tell." But even as she spoke, her voice cracked. Fear seeped into her tone. The authority she once commanded in this waiting room was dissolving like sand through her fingers. The old woman looked up at her, her gaze steady. "You look at me and see nothing," she said. "But soon you will see everything." A murmur rippled through the patients. The teenager whispered, "She talks like she's important." His mother replied, "Maybe she is." Director Harris's lips tightened into something between a smile and a warning. He already knew. His eyes told it. But he wasn't ready to reveal it, not yet. Instead, he turned to the watching crowd. Did anyone hear exactly what was said to this woman? Dozens of hands went up. Voices overlapped. She told her she didn't belong. She said she wasn't worthy. She tried to push her out. Each voice was another crack in the nurse's mask. Her eyes darted from one face to another, her own lies cornering her. Desperate, she raised her voice. You don't understand. People like her slow everything down. We have standards here. Standards? Director Harris interrupted, his tone sharp as glass. Or prejudice? The nurse froze, her mouth open but no words forming. The old woman tapped her cane once more against the floor. Tap. The sound echoed louder this time, like a gavel in a courtroom. Her eyes never left the nurse. Do you feel the ground shifting beneath you? She asked calmly. That is what happens when truth begins to walk in. The nurse's face drained of color dot from across the room. The businessman who had spoken earlier stood slowly. Director Harris, he said firmly, I think we all know what we heard. And if this hospital treats patients like that, then perhaps none of us are safe. The director nodded slightly, his voice calm but resolute. Exactly. Susan's composure cracked. You don't understand, she's manipulating you all. She's just some nobody trying to play the victim. But even as she said it, she knew she had lost, because the old woman was not a nobody dot, and soon the truth of who she was would not only strip Susan of her authority, it would shake the entire institution to its core. Director Harris glanced once more at the photograph on the woman's lap. His expression shifted from recognition to something deeper. Reverence dot, and though he did not yet speak it aloud, his silence told the room. She is not just anyone. The waiting room felt like a courtroom now. Every pair of eyes judging not only the nurse but the hospital itself. The old woman sat still, her cane steady in her hands, her faded photograph resting like a secret on her lap. She had spoken little, yet her silence commanded more respect than all the nurse's authority combined. Nurse Susan's voice trembled as she tried again. You're all letting her fool you. She's nobody. Just a stubborn old lady who doesn't want to follow the rules. But even as she spoke, her voice carried no weight. No one believed her anymore. Director Harris stepped closer, his hands clasped behind his back, his presence towering not in height but in calm authority. His eyes locked on the old woman. Ma'am, he said quietly, though the entire room could hear, it has been a long time since I've seen someone sit so still. With so much strength, the old woman tilted her head, a faint smile touching her lips. Strength is not in shouting, she replied. It is in waiting for the right moment. The nurse rolled her eyes. Oh, enough of these riddles. She turned sharply to the director. Why are you giving her so much importance? She's no one. A murmur rippled across the waiting room. A mother shook her head in disgust. The teenage boy whispered to his mother, She doesn't get it, does she? Director Harris finally faced Susan directly. His voice dropped low, steady, piercing. You would do well to hold your tongue. The nurse froze, caught between fear and defiance. Then, to everyone's surprise, the director turned back to the old woman, his tone shifting, respectful, almost reverent. You remind me, he said slowly, of someone who once walked through these halls years ago. Someone who built parts of this very hospital with her hands. The room gasped. Patients leaned forward, curiosity burning brighter. The nurse stammered, What do you mean? The old woman did not answer immediately. She simply looked down at the photograph, brushing her finger gently across its worn surface. Director Harris continued, his voice heavier now. There are stories, he said, about a woman who worked day and night, not for recognition, not for wealth, but to ensure people in this city, regardless of who they were, would have a place of healing. I have read her name in records. I have seen her signature on walls no one notices anymore. Whispers grew louder in the waiting room. Could it be her? Is that why she looks familiar? She doesn't seem ordinary. The nurse shook her head violently. No, that's impossible. She's just making you remember someone else. She's nothing but silence. The director's word was quiet, but it struck Susan harder than a shout. Her mouth snapped shut, her chest heaving. The old woman finally lifted her eyes, and when she spoke, her voice carried not anger, but truth. Names fade, faces change, but deeds, they remain. The nurse's knees felt weak beneath her. The director bowed his head slightly, a gesture that shocked everyone watching. If I am right about who you are, he said softly, then this hospital owes you more than any of us can repay. The room erupted in whispers. Some covered their mouths in disbelief. Others nodded slowly, realization dawning. The nurse, pale and trembling, whispered under her breath, No, she can't be. The old woman placed the photograph back into her handbag, closed it gently, and tapped her cane against the floor. Tap. Respect, she said, is not given by uniforms or titles. It is proven in moments like these. The nurse staggered back a step, as though the very air had turned against her. And for the first time, the crowd began to look at the old woman not with pity, but with awe. The truth was near. Very near. The waiting room was no longer just a waiting room. It had transformed into a stage of truth. Every eye was fixed on the old woman as she slowly reached into her handbag again, pulling out the photograph that had sat quietly on her lap for so long. Her fingers trembled, not with weakness, but with the weight of memory. She held it up, letting the dim fluorescent light reveal its worn edges. This, she said softly, was taken nearly 40 years ago, the nurse scoffed loudly. A photograph proves nothing. Anyone can wave around an old picture. But the director raised his hand, silencing her instantly. His gaze did not leave the woman. Show us, he urged. The old woman turned the photograph around, facing the crowd. Gasps echoed across the room. It was a group of hospital staff standing proudly beside the foundation stone of the building. Nurses in white caps, doctors in long coats, construction workers with helmets, and right there, at the center, a young black woman in plain clothes, holding a box of medical supplies, smiling with the light of hope. That's you. A man in the corner shouted, pointing. That's you right there in the middle. The old woman nodded slowly. I was younger then, stronger. I worked night shifts as a cleaner, then stayed in the mornings to help the builders. I brought water, carried bricks, delivered food, whatever was needed. Not because I was asked, not because I was paid, but because this hospital was my dream too. Her voice cracked slightly, but she continued. I knew this place would save lives. I wanted it to be built faster, so no mother would lose her child for lack of care. No man would die waiting for help. The room fell silent. Some of the patients had tears in their eyes. The teenage boy whispered, She helped build this place. She's part of its history. The nurse shook her head furiously. Lies. She's just telling a sob story. You can't believe. But before she could finish, Director Harris stepped forward and took the photograph from the woman's hand, examining it carefully. His jaw tightened. I know this picture, he said firmly. It's in our archives. I've seen it hanging in the old administrative wing. This is no fake. The nurse's face drained of color. And no, that can't be true. The director turned, holding up the photograph for everyone to see. Ladies and gentlemen, he declared, this woman is not just a patient. She is part of the very foundation of this hospital. She stood here before any of us, before even I had a place within these walls. The crowd erupted, some clapping, others crying. A mother reached out and touched the old woman's hand, whispering, Thank you. Thank you for what you did for us." The old woman lowered her gaze humbly. "I never asked for thanks. All I wanted was to know this place would always welcome everyone, that no one would be turned away." Her words cut deep. The irony was bitter. After dedicating her youth to this hospital, she herself had been rejected by a nurse's prejudice. The nurse backed away, shaking. No, this isn't fair. She's nobody. She's just enough." The director's voice thundered now, no longer calm. "Every word you've spoken today has dishonored this hospital. This woman has done more for this institution than you ever could." The nurse stumbled into a chair, her arrogance crumbling under the weight of truth. The old woman lifted her head again, her eyes misty but strong. "Respect is not about remembering my name," she said. "It is about remembering why this hospital exists. To heal, not to judge." The crowd rose to their feet one by one, until nearly the entire waiting room was standing and silent. Honor. The photograph shook in the director's hands as he looked at her. "We owe you everything," he whispered. And for the first time, the nurse realized she was utterly, undeniably defeated. But the old woman's story was not finished. The photograph was only the beginning of a much greater truth, one that would shake the hospital even more. The crowd's whispers turned into a hushed silence as Director Harris placed the photograph gently on the counter, almost like it was sacred. His voice carried across the room with the weight of something more than authority. It carried reverence. "This woman is not only a witness to the creation of this hospital," he began. "She is one of its unspoken founders." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the room. The old woman blinked, shaking her head slightly. "I never built the walls with my own hands. I only carried small things, gave what little I had." But the director raised his hand. "No, you gave more than bricks and bread. Our records and this photograph confirm what few remember. During the strikes in '85, when staff walked out and supplies were short, it was you who brought food to patients every night. When storms flooded the basement ward, it was you who carried children on your back to safety. And when medicine shipments stalled, you went door to door in your neighborhood, collecting what little people could spare. Without you, lives would have been lost." The old woman lowered her gaze, as if the memories weighed heavier than her frail body could bear. The teenage boy leaned forward, whispering to his mother. She saved people before she even had a uniform. The nurse's face twisted, desperate to hold on to some shred of control. This is ridiculous. She was just a cleaner, a nobody. Hospitals are built by doctors, not by people like her." The room recoiled at her words, as if she had spat poison into the air. Even the other nurses looked away in shame. Director Harris's jaw hardened. "You are wrong. Hospitals are built by everyone who believes in healing. By doctors, yes, but also by janitors who scrub the floors, by neighbors who carry supplies, and by women like her who gave everything without expecting recognition." The old woman finally lifted her eyes. "Recognition was never what I sought. I only wanted to know that one day, someone like me would never be turned away." Her words struck like thunder. A mother in the corner began to cry, clutching her child to her chest. An old man nodded, murmuring, "That's what true dignity looks like." The nurse's composure broke. She stumbled backward, shaking her head violently. "No, this isn't happening. This can't be real. She's just. Her voice faltered, unable to finish the sentence, but the room had already judged her. The balance of power had shifted completely. The nurse, once arrogant and untouchable, now looked small, exposed. The director took a step closer to the old woman. "You gave us a hospital, and today we almost denied you the very care you helped make possible. For that, I ask forgiveness, not just for myself, but for every voice of arrogance that tried to silence you." The old woman's lips quivered, but she gave a soft smile. Forgiveness is not mine to give. All I ever asked was to be seen as human. The crowd could no longer remain seated. One by one, they stood, not out of curiosity now, but out of respect. Some bowed their heads, others placed hands over their hearts. Even the patients on crutches or wheelchairs shifted forward to honor her. The nurse collapsed into a chair, her uniform suddenly looking like a costume she didn't deserve to wear. Her arrogance had evaporated, leaving only the sting of shame. A hush fell again, broken only when the teenage boy walked up to the old woman and held her hand. "You deserve more than a chair in the waiting room," he said with quiet strength. "You deserve a place in history." Tears welled in her eyes. She whispered, "History forgets faces like mine." But the director shook his head firmly. "Not anymore. As long as I lead this hospital, your name, your legacy, will never be erased again." The crowd clapped, not loud or chaotic, but steady, like a heartbeat of justice. Yet, even as the room honored her, the old woman's gaze drifted away, lost in thought. There was still something unsaid, something she had carried for decades, a secret that even the director didn't know. And when it surfaced, it would change everything. The waiting room still pulsed with the echo of applause. The old woman sat quietly, her frail hands folded over her handbag, while the nurse cowered in the corner, stripped of her arrogance. But beneath the calm, the woman's eyes carried something heavier. She knew the time had come to speak the truth she had hidden for far too long. Her voice, soft but unshakable, cut through the silence. "There is something you still do not know. Something even the archives will not tell you." The crowd leaned in. The director frowned slightly, sensing the gravity of her words. "Go on," he urged gently. She opened her handbag again, but this time she pulled out not a photograph, but an old envelope. Its edges were yellow, its seal cracked with age. She placed it carefully on the counter. "This," she whispered, "was the letter I received from the board in 1987, Director." Harris picked it up cautiously and unfolded the brittle paper. His eyes scanned the faded ink. As he read, his face tightened, then softened, then froze in shock. "What is it?" Someone called from the crowd. The director looked up, his voice trembling. "This letter, it thanks her for a private donation. A donation so large it covered nearly half the hospital's debts when construction stalled. Without it, this building would never have been finished." The crowd gasped, louder this time. All eyes snapped back to the old woman. The nurse's jaw fell open. No, that's impossible. How could she? She's poor. She's nothing." The old woman lifted her chin with quiet dignity. "I was poor, yes. But my husband, before he died, he left me a small inheritance. I could have kept it for myself, lived a little easier. But I chose to give it away to this hospital, to a dream larger than myself." Her words hung in the air like a storm. The director shook his head in disbelief. "You saved this hospital not once, but twice, with your hands and with your sacrifice." She smiled faintly. "Money is spent and forgotten. But lives saved? They echo forever." The teenage boy squeezed her hand tighter. "You gave everything, and they treated you like nothing." The nurse's voice cracked, desperate, clinging to denial. "She's lying. She forged that letter." But before anyone could react, one of the older doctors stepped forward from the back of the crowd. His hair was silver, his posture bent, but his voice carried weight. "I remember that donation," he said firmly. "We never knew who gave it. The board kept it anonymous because the donor requested silence. Now I see. It was you all along." The room erupted in murmurs again. Faces turned to the nurse with disgust, while others bowed their heads toward the old woman in awe. The nurse staggered to her feet, her composure shattered. No, this can't be happening. You're just trying to make me look like the villain." The director's eyes hardened. You needed no help with that. Your own words condemned you. The old woman leaned back in her chair, her breath a little heavier, but her spirit glowing. I never wanted recognition. I only wanted to know that this hospital, my hospital, would never close its doors to anyone. And yet, today I was told I did not belong. Her words were arrows striking deep into the hearts of everyone present. Even the walls of the hospital seemed to echo with shame. The director bowed his head to her. We failed you today. But tomorrow, the world will know who you are. Your story will not be buried again. Tears glistened in the old woman's eyes. For the first time, the burden she had carried for decades felt lighter. But before the moment could settle, a voice from the back cut through the crowd. Then let the board hear it directly. She deserves her place in history. All heads turned. It was the chairman of the hospital board stepping into the waiting room. His presence meant only one thing: judgment was about to be delivered. The applause in the waiting room faded into a hushed reverence, as though the walls themselves leaned in to listen. The old woman sat silently, her posture fragile yet unbroken, her handbag resting on her lap like a vault of untold stories. Her eyes, deep with memory, swept across the room. Every gaze was upon her, some filled with awe, some with shame. And then, slowly, she spoke. There is still something you don't know, she said. Her voice was quiet but carried the weight of truth, enough to silence even the hum of the overhead lights. Something even the hospital records will never tell you. Director Harris leaned closer, his brow furrowed. What do you mean? Her frail hands moved again toward the handbag. Instead of the photograph, she drew out an old, worn envelope. Its edges were yellow, its corners torn, as if it had survived decades of storms. She placed it gently on the counter, her fingers lingering over it as though reluctant to let it go. This, she whispered, is the letter I received in 1987. The director picked it up carefully, as if it might crumble in his grasp. He unfolded the fragile paper, and the faded ink revealed itself under the dim hospital lights. As he read, his eyes widened, then softened, and finally froze in disbelief. His voice trembled. This letter, it's from the hospital board. He swallowed hard, then read aloud. We extend our deepest gratitude for your anonymous contribution. Your generosity has saved this hospital from imminent closure. The future of this institution rests on your sacrifice. The room gasped in unison. The nurse's voice cracked through the silence, sharp and defensive. No, that's impossible. She's lying. She couldn't have given money. She's poor. Look at her. But the old woman lifted her chin, her voice steady. I was poor, yes. I still am. But my husband left me a small inheritance when he passed. Enough to live a little easier, maybe even escape the struggles of my life. But instead, I gave it away. Her voice deepened with emotion. The hospital was drowning. Construction had stopped, debts were mounting, and they said the project would be abandoned. I could not bear the thought. This place, our community's only hope, would have vanished before it even opened. So I gave everything I had. Not for recognition, not for applause, but because lives were worth more than comfort. Her words fell like stones in water, rippling through every heart in the room. The director's hand trembled as he held the letter. You saved us. You saved this hospital before it was even born. The old woman nodded gently. Money disappears. Comfort fades. But a hospital? It saves lives long after we are gone. That was enough for me. Tears welled in the eyes of patients and families. A young mother whispered to her child, She's the reason you were born here. The reason you're alive. The teenage boy who had been defending her all along squeezed her hand, his own voice breaking. You gave everything, and they treated you like nothing. That's not right. That's not justice." The nurse, pale and trembling, shook her head violently. "It's fake. She forged that letter. You're all fools if you believe her." But before she could say more, an elderly doctor stepped forward from the back of the room. His hair was white, his back stooped, but his eyes burned with memory. "I remember that donation," he said firmly. "We were drowning in debt. We begged the board for help, and they told us an anonymous donor had come forward. Without that gift, the hospital would have closed its doors before they ever opened. I never knew who gave it. Until now." He turned to the old woman, tears glistening in his eyes. "It was you. All these years? It was you." The room erupted again, gasps, murmurs, some breaking into applause despite the weight of the revelation. The nurse staggered backward, her uniform now a costume of disgrace. No, this isn't happening. She's nothing. She's just a cleaner." The director rounded on her, his voice like thunder. "Enough. Every word you speak drags you deeper into your own shame. Look around you. This woman has done more for this hospital than you ever will in your lifetime." The nurse's face collapsed, her arrogance crumbling like ash. The old woman's eyes glistened, her smile faint but resolute. "Recognition was never what I sought. I only wanted to know that one day someone like me would not be turned away." The word struck the crowd like a hammer. People shifted uncomfortably, guilt heavy in the air. Even those who had not spoken against her now realized their silence had been a weapon too. The director bowed his head deeply before her. "We wronged you. Today, in this very building you gave your life to, we failed you. But tomorrow, the world will know who you are. I will see to it that your story is never buried again." One by one, people began to stand. Some clapped, others bowed their heads. A ripple of respect spread through the waiting room until nearly everyone was on their feet, honoring the frail woman who had given everything, even fat. Those who had come as strangers now looked at her as family, the grandmother of the hospital itself. The nurse slumped in her chair, her eyes hollow, as though the very walls of the hospital rejected her presence. The old woman's gaze drifted upward, her breath heavy but her spirit free. "It was never about me," she whispered. "It was always about this place and the people it serves." And then a new voice cut through the reverence. Strong, commanding, unmistakable. Then let the board hear it from her own lips. The crowd turned as the doors swung open. A tall man in a dark suit stepped inside. His presence commanded silence. It was the chairman of the hospital board, his expression unreadable. The director stiffened. The nurse gasped. The old woman simply folded her hands once more, ready for whatever came next. Justice was about to be delivered. The hospital's auditorium was overflowing with staff, patients, and reporters. The tension in the room was almost unbearable, but there was also a quiet sense of justice hovering in the air. The whispers of the crowd echoed off the high ceilings, merging into one loud murmur as the hospital director, Dr. Eleanor Hayes, took her place at the podium. Right behind her stood Evelyn Carter, the elderly black woman who had been humiliated and rejected by the racist nurse weeks earlier. She clutched her cane tightly, her wrinkled hands trembling not from weakness, but from the weight of what was about to unfold. At her side was her grandson Marcus, his chest swelling with pride as he supported her. On the opposite side of the stage, the disgraced nurse, Karen White, sat stiffly in a chair, her face pale and drained of the arrogance she once carried. Her lawyer whispered in her ear, but Karen's eyes kept darting nervously between the audience and the director. Dr. Hayes adjusted the microphone, her gaze sharp but composed. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are gathered here today," she began, her voice steady, "not to shame one individual, but to confront a culture that has been silently tolerated for far too long. What happened to Mrs. Carter in our hospital was not just an insult to her dignity, it was a failure of our values as a community. The audience clapped lightly, but Evelyn raised a hand, signaling for silence. She wanted to speak. Taking a slow step forward, Evelyn positioned herself at the microphone. The entire room fell into pin-drop silence. Her voice was soft at first, but it carried the weight of generations. I came to this hospital because I needed care. I am 76 years old, and I have seen the world change in many ways. But that day, I was reminded of the cruel times I thought we had left behind. I was treated like I was invisible, like my life didn't matter. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Evelyn's eyes watered, but she held her composure. But then, she continued, her voice growing stronger, I realized something. If I stayed silent, then this would not just happen to me. It would happen to others, to someone else's mother, to someone else's grandmother. And I could not let that happen. Her words sent a wave of emotion through the audience. Some nurses in the crowd wiped away tears. Others lowered their heads in shame. Marcus stepped up beside her, his voice firm. My grandmother raised me to believe in standing up for what's right. Today, we are not here to destroy someone, we are here to change something. Hospitals are meant to heal, not to wound. And no patient of any race should ever feel unwanted. The crowd erupted into applause, standing on their feet. The cameras flashed. Evelyn leaned into her grandson's shoulder. Exhausted but relieved, Dr. Hayes took back the podium. In light of these events, the hospital board has reached a decision. Nurse Karen White's license will be permanently revoked. Furthermore, mandatory anti-racism and compassion training will be implemented for all staff immediately. And let it be known, discrimination of any kind will not be tolerated within these walls. Gasps filled the room, followed by thunderous applause. Karen buried her face in her hands, tears streaming down her cheeks. For the first time, the once proud nurse felt the crushing weight of accountability. But Evelyn wasn't done. She walked toward Karen, her cane clicking softly against the stage floor. The room grew quiet again. Evelyn's eyes, though tired, were filled with both pain and grace. Karen, she said softly, you hurt me deeply. You made me feel small. But today I forgive you. Not because you asked for it, but because I refused to carry the burden of hate in my heart. I pray you learn from this, so that one day, if you ever have the chance to help someone in need, you will remember this moment. Karen looked up, stunned. Her lips trembled as she whispered, I'm sorry. It wasn't loud enough for the whole audience. But Evelyn heard it, and that was enough. The audience broke into a standing ovation. People shouted Evelyn's name. Reporters scribbled frantically, capturing every word, every tear, every moment. Evelyn Carter had gone from being humiliated in a hospital lobby to standing as a symbol of courage, dignity, and forgiveness. As the applause continued, Evelyn leaned on Marcus and whispered, It's over now. But maybe it's also just the beginning. Epilogue. A week later, newspapers across the country carried the headline, Elderly Black Woman Brings Down Racism in Hospital. Her Forgiveness Stuns the Nation. Evelyn's story went viral. Messages of support poured in from around the world. Schools shared her speech. Churches quoted her words. And hospitals everywhere began reviewing their own policies. Evelyn sat in her small living room, watching the news. She shook her head humbly. I didn't do anything special, she murmured. I just told the truth, Marcus smiled at her. No, Grandma. You showed the world what real strength looks like, and for the first time in years, Evelyn felt truly at peace.